Okay, folks, thank you for staying right where you were and not changing your dial. This is Patrick Franz, your host, the Real Men of Real Estate radio show here on KCAA. I am back with my guest, Bill Bymel, the man, the myth, the legend, president of First Lien Capital, author of the WinWin Revolution book. Hey, Bill, before we get right back into what we were talking about, how can people find your book, WinWin Revolution, if they want to go get a copy?
Sure. WinWin Revolution is available on Amazon. Just Google it, WinWin Revolution book, and it will pop up. And you can, if you're a Kindle Unlimited reader like myself, you actually can read it for free. Otherwise, you might have to flip a few dollars and to have it to you next day.
Oh, flip a few dollars to Bill. He deserves it. He's a good guy. And the book is amazing, right? It has a lot of good info in there. So the WinWin Revolution, go get it on Amazon while you can. There's not a lot of copies. Get in there and get yours while you can. So anyways, Bill, tell us a little bit, president of First Lien Capital. You were mentioning First Lien Capital specializes in non-performing loan purchases and working those out and making good profit while helping borrowers and such. Can you give us a little bit about how do you operate, Bill? Why are you different than other people that are in the space? We'll get into some forbearance stuff too, but how are you different?
Yeah, no. Good question. And, as I said in the first segment, we operate in a different part. We're in the distressed mortgage space. So it's after there is a subset of mortgages on any given year that will stop performing. They'll be known as NPLs, non-performing loans, or distressed mortgages. And, that could happen in the normal course of time. Somebody dies and they don't pay their mortgage, or, they lose their job, or there's some other thing that happens. That happens every year. There's a 2 to 4% default rate. And, obviously those numbers were much higher 14 years ago when I got in the space. We were talking about a 14% default rate at one point in 2009. Which, when you compare that to a $12 trillion residential mortgage market, it gives you the numbers in hundreds of billions of dollars of mortgage debt that had stopped performing. The banks unloaded it, started foreclosure, and they sold it off to investors at a discount in many cases. Now, when that happened, the idea of buying mortgages at a discount obviously was very exciting to me. But we had to create a new paradigm for how to deal with borrowers 14 years ago, because everyone was walking away from their real estate. Everyone was upside down. People had lost their jobs. We got in what was called the Great Recession, right, of 2008 to 2009, 2010. And so we were dealing with thousands of mortgages. My first foray into this space was a 2,000 loan portfolio in Port St. Lucie. You literally had 2,000 mortgages within a 10 square mile radius that were all non-performing, where you had $200,000, $300,000 mortgages, and the property values were dropping down below 100,000. And so we created a paradigm that was borrower oriented. If we're going to deal with distressed mortgages, we do not want to fight it out in court. We don't want to be a big bad bank. So we created a paradigm to operate differently than most investors in the space. We buy our mortgages at a discount to their face value, and we in turn want to pass along a portion of that savings back to our borrowers. How do we do that? Well, if a borrower is upside down and they were going into foreclosure, they might be looking at a deficiency balance. We would waive that deficiency balance if they cooperate with us. We, in many cases, will pay people to relocate if they're living in a property that they can no longer afford. We'll offer them $10,000 or $15,000 in relocation expenses, set them up with first, last, and security on a new house. And why not? Because we're going to spend $5,000 or $10,000 on attorneys anyways to foreclose. So the win, and that's where the idea of the win-win revolution came, is that we're constantly looking for ways to take a stressful situation, the borrower's in default, not wanting to pick up the phone, not wanting to deal with the debt in the situation, and we turn it into how can we help them? And in doing so, we've made a lot of money doing it because, for instance, we'll modify people. If I can, if we can keep somebody in their home and maybe they went through a tough time, the banks are very difficult to deal with when mortgages get distressed. You are not going to get an easy modification. You have to go through a lot of paperwork. Any of these options I talk about, when you're dealing with large institutions, there's not as much flexibility. So as private equity investors, I used to say we were like a bailout for a lot of people when we were buying mortgages back in 2009, 2010, because we'd, hand us the keys, we'd waive the debt, goodbye, we'd give you some money. It was a win-win all day long. So that's what we've created and what kind of separates us from other investors, especially in the distressed mortgage space.
I'm glad you went there because again, exactly why Bill Bymel wrote the Win-Win Revolution. Exactly
That's right.
why. So yeah, guys, get his book, The Win-Win Revolution, on Amazon, where you can read about this. And it's such a cool thing, Bill, that many different aspects related to investing is step on one guy to get up and to become profitable, and to work against people as competitors and things like that, and to get the inside track on things before other people hear about it. Man, what I love about being a note investor, because we're not a big bank. They're not just a number to us. You can help the borrower in so many different ways and always make it a win-win scenario.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Talking about win-win. So like a lot of people thought that when the COVID came about and people started to get a little bit stretched financially, maybe their office shut down or their job got cut off for 6 months and they lost that income, and looking for help out there. And they went and they got these things called forbearances on their mortgages. And, it almost seemed like, well, geez, these banks are being so nice to us and they're giving us this forbearance and it's a win-win. I get to stay in my house. The bank's not going to do it. But give us an idea. And for the folks listening, what are these forbearances that people got? What are the effects that are going to take place from them? And how will it affect the market?
First of all, it wasn't the banks being nice. It was actually written into law in the CARES Act that the banks were and servicers were required to give forbearances to anyone that asked for them. And to give you some perspective, at the time that COVID started 2 years ago, nobody knew what we were in for. It was probably made sense to set up this forbearance program. And to date, since in the last 2 years, 5 million people have gone through the forbearance program. And over 3.5 million of those people have successfully exited the forbearance program, either by making their payments up or getting a modification or getting some kind of workout or payoff or whatnot. So it was a very valuable program for a lot of Americans. And it certainly did help some people. I also know some friends of mine who just took advantage of it, who didn't need the forbearance, but they were like, hey, if I can write, 10 less mortgage payments on my investment properties, I'll do that. What we all realized, those investors that did that realized very quickly, was those payments don't go away. And that's really kind of leads us to where we are now 2 years later, that now that these forbearance, the mandate on forbearances is now over. So the government requirement ended officially all on a national level, January 15th of this year. And what's, what we're seeing is a 1 million to 1.5 million people that remain in forbearance or in a current default coming out of forbearance. You have to realize that if somebody really did lose their job at the beginning of COVID, then, hasn't been able to get another job, or and now they've got 24 months of payments or 18 months of payments to right size the ship. There's not a streamlined modification program in place in this country. So every one of those $1 million to $1.5 million mortgages in these forbearance programs that still remain in forbearance, those people need an individual workout. Now, what's happened is that now that foreclosure moratorium is done, the forbearance requirement has ended, you've seen a flurry of private investor pre-COVID foreclosures restarting. Every attorney I talk to says they've been getting 500 to 1,000 new files a month, since January 15th. And that doesn't even include the big banks. The big banks are still holding back thousands and thousands of mortgages in default. And I know for a fact one of the larger servicers, I spoke to a senior executive last month, and I was told that they have 40,000 mortgages that should otherwise have been in foreclosure that are not starting foreclosure because none of the big banks want to pull the trigger and be the first one to admit that there's a lot of stressed out people still out there at the end of this program.
Yeah. And, it's for people's understanding, right? Let's say that a bank or a fund or a note investor owned a non-performing delinquent mortgage. And their plan was to either work something out with the borrower or go ahead and get them to sign the house over and walk away clean or go through a foreclosure or whatever it may be. It was put on hold, right? Because the COVID, they said foreclosure and eviction, they put a moratorium on, saying that landlords and lenders could not foreclose and could not evict. Well, in that case, imagine a bank that was going to enter a borrower into a foreclosure process and had a plan. And then all of a sudden, right in the middle of that plan, got hit with the COVID moratoriums on foreclosure and eviction. And all of a sudden, what do? Their plan came to a halt. And now that everything's lifted, they're able to go ahead and start continuing business as usual.
And what I think will happen is, rather than the banks opening up the foreclosure gates, I think that those loans will be sold in the secondary mortgage market. This is where you and I, Patrick, go to buy our loans, and they will make their way out there. I know of some major government loan sales about to be announced, and we're going to start to see it probably more at the servicer and secondary mortgage market level, but we're going to be seeing an increase in foreclosures. There's just no doubt.
And that's going to create an opportunity for those of us that are already in the note investing world, or folks that want to get into the note investing world and add this to their portfolio, being a note investor, right? So we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more, folks, after this commercial break, about the state of the market, about the opportunity, why it might be a nice thing for you to learn how to be a note investor. So folks, Patrick Franz here on KCAA Radio, the Real Men of Real Estate radio show. We're going to come right back from this commercial break with more from my amazing guest, Bill Bymel. Do not go anywhere.